My daughter-in-law's mother has been cold to me since the day my son brought her daughter home. I told myself it was just cultural differences. I told myself to be patient. But the night of that dinner in Scottsdale, I finally understood that what I had been calling cultural differences was something else entirely. And the most remarkable part, she had no idea I could understand every single word she was saying. Let me back up. My name is Dorothy, and I am 63 years old. I raised my son, Patrick, by myself after his father passed when Patrick was 11. We did not have much, but we had each other, and I made sure that boy knew he was loved every single day. I worked as a medical transcriptionist for 22 years, and when Patrick was in college, I went back to school myself. Not for a degree, just for something I had always wanted. I enrolled in a Japanese language program at the community college near our home in Columbus, Ohio. People thought I was eccentric. My sister called it a midlife crisis. But I had always been drawn to the language, ever since a Japanese colleague at my office had taught me a few phrases back in the 90s, and something about the structure of it, the precision of it, had never left me. I studied for 4 years. I got good, then I got better. I found a conversation group that met every Tuesday evening at the public library, mostly retired professors and a few exchange students, and I practiced until I could hold a real conversation. Then I found an online tutor based in Osaka, a retired school teacher named Mrs. Tanaka, and I worked with her twice a week for 3 more years. By the time Patrick graduated and started his career in commercial real estate, I was fluent. Not perfect. I still made grammatical errors that would make a native speaker wince, but fluent enough to read a newspaper, watch a drama without subtitles, and understand exactly what was being said around me. I never advertised this. It was mine. It was the one thing I had done purely for myself, and I kept it quiet the way you keep a garden that only you know about. Patrick knew I had studied Japanese at some point. He had seen the textbooks on my shelf, but I do not think he ever fully registered what that meant in practical terms. To him, it was just another one of Mom's hobbies, filed somewhere between her watercolor phase and her sourdough phase. He met Yuki 3 years ago. She is a lovely young woman. I mean that sincerely. Bright, ambitious, well put together. She works in finance and she carries herself with a kind of quiet confidence that I respected immediately. Her parents, Kenji and Fumiko, had immigrated from Kyoto in the 1980s and built a very successful import business here in Arizona. They were established. They had money and connections and a very specific idea of what their daughter's life should look like. From the beginning, Fumiko was polite to me in that particular way that is actually the opposite of warmth. She would smile and ask about my flight and compliment my earrings, and then she would pivot immediately to a conversation with someone else. Kenji was quieter, watchful, I would say. He looked at me the way someone looks at a piece of furniture they are not sure belongs in the room. At family gatherings, they would speak in Japanese among themselves. I understood this completely. When my own mother was alive, she spoke to her sisters in Polish at the dinner table, and nobody thought anything of it. So I never took offense at the language itself. But as my Japanese improved, as the months passed and I began to understand more and more of what was being said, I started to notice things, small things at first. Fumiko referring to me as the widow rather than by my name. Kenji making a comment once about how Patrick had not been raised with the right values around family, and then laughing softly, Fumiko agreeing, a remark about my house in Columbus being modest. The word she used was not unkind exactly, but the tone was. I said nothing. I was not there to cause conflict. I was there because I loved my son, and I was trying to build a relationship with the people who were becoming his family. I smiled. I passed the food. I asked questions about their business, and I kept what I understood to myself like water held in cupped hands. Then came the dinner in Scottsdale. Patrick called me in early October. He sounded excited in that careful way he has when he is trying not to get his hopes up. He said that Kenji had been approached by a developer in Phoenix who wanted to import high-end Japanese architectural materials, specific types of cypress wood, handmade roof tiles, a particular style of sliding door panel, and that Patrick's firm had been brought in as a potential partner on the real estate side. There was a dinner planned with the Japanese developer, a man named Mr. Harada, and his 2 associates who were flying in from Tokyo. Mom, Patrick said, "Kenji specifically asked if you'd like to come. He said it would be good to have more family there." I will be honest, something about that surprised me. It was the first time Kenji had expressed any interest in my presence, but I was touched, and I said yes. The dinner was at a private room in a restaurant in North Scottsdale, the kind of place with heavy linen napkins and lighting so dim you have to squint at the menu. There were 8 of us at the table: Kenji and Fumiko, Patrick and Yuki, Mr. Harada and his 2 associates, and me. Mr. Harada was in his 60s, silver-haired, impeccably dressed. His associates were younger, attentive, taking notes on small leather-bound pads. Everyone was in good spirits. The wine was excellent. The food arrived in beautiful small portions. The conversation moved between English and Japanese naturally, the way it does in rooms where everyone is comfortable in both. Mr. Harada spoke very good English. His associates spoke less, so the table would drift into Japanese periodically and then drift back. I sat near the end of the table next to Patrick, who was doing his best. My son is charming and professional, and he was clearly working hard to make a good impression. About 40 minutes into the dinner, while Patrick had stepped out briefly to take a call from his office, Kenji leaned toward Mr. Harada and said something in Japanese that made me set down my fork. He said, and I am translating this as precisely as I can, that Patrick was a fine young man on the surface, but that his family background was thin. He used a word that implies a lack of depth, of roots. He said that Patrick's mother, meaning me, was a nice enough woman, but that she was simple. Not unintelligent exactly, but without sophistication, without real substance. He said that Yuki deserved a partner whose family brought something of weight to the table, and that he was not yet convinced Patrick's side of the family offered that. Mr. Harada listened. He nodded slowly. He did not agree enthusiastically. I noticed that. But he did not object either. Fumiko added something. She said that she worried Patrick did not truly understand what he was entering into, that the business world at this level required a certain upbringing, a certain formation, and that Patrick's formation had been limited by circumstance. She glanced at me as she said it, briefly, the way you glance at something you have already assessed and dismissed. I looked down at my plate. My heart was beating in a way I recognized. Not anger exactly, or not only anger. It was the particular feeling of having something confirmed that you had been trying not to believe. I had told myself for 3 years that Fumiko's coolness was about shyness, or about cultural differences in how warmth is expressed, or about the natural friction of 2 families learning each other. And here it was, laid out in plain language at a dinner table in Scottsdale, while I sat 2 feet away pretending to be absorbed in my sea bass. Patrick came back to the table. He sat down. He touched my arm lightly. He is an affectionate person, my son, and asked if I was all right, because I must have looked pale. I told him I was fine, just a little tired from the drive. Kenji resumed his conversation in English, then, smooth as anything, asking Patrick a question about zoning regulations in the Phoenix metro area. Patrick answered. The dinner continued. Mr. Harada ordered dessert, and I made a decision. I waited. I have learned, over 63 years, that timing is almost everything. You can say the right thing at the wrong moment and accomplish nothing. So I waited until there was a natural pause, until Kenji had finished making a point about material sourcing, until Mr. Harada had nodded and set down his glass, and then I turned to Mr. Harada and I spoke. In Japanese, I said that I hoped the evening had been productive and that the project sounded like something genuinely worth building. I said that good architecture, the kind that is meant to last, requires people who understand that real quality is not always visible on the surface. I said that I had been studying Japanese for nearly a decade, because I believed that if you wanted to understand a culture well enough to truly partner with it, you had to go to its language first. I kept my tone warm. I was not performing anger. I was not making a scene. I was simply speaking. The effect on Mr. Harada was immediate. He looked at me with an expression that shifted in real time. Surprise first, then what I can only describe as recalibration. He responded to me in Japanese. He asked how long I had studied and where. I told him about the community college, about the Tuesday group at the library, about Mrs. Tanaka in Osaka. He laughed, not at me, but with the genuine delight of someone who has just discovered something unexpected. He said my pronunciation was very good. He said that most Americans gave up far too early. I thanked him. I told him it helped to have a reason that mattered to you. I glanced briefly at Patrick when I said that. Kenji had gone very still. Fumiko's smile had not moved, but something behind it had. I could see her processing, recalculating, the way a person does when the coordinates they have been navigating by turn out to be wrong. Patrick was looking at me with an expression I will carry with me for the rest of my life. He knew enough to know that something significant had just happened, even if he did not know exactly what. He looked at me the way he used to look at me when he was small and I had done something that surprised him, with this open, wondering expression, like the world had just revealed a new room he did not know was there. Mr. Harada asked me something then that I did not expect. He asked whether I had ever been to Japan. I told him I had not, that it had been a dream I had not yet managed to make real. He said that was a shame, and that people who loved a language deserved to hear it in its own landscape. He said this kindly, with the particular graciousness that I had come to associate with his manner throughout the dinner. Then he turned to Kenji. He spoke in Japanese. He said, and this is something I will not forget, that in his experience, the families worth doing business with were not always the ones with the longest history or the most obvious credentials. He said he had learned to look for people who invested in things that did not have an immediate return. He said that learning a language in your 60s, for the love of it, was exactly the kind of investment he trusted. He was not scolding Kenji. He was a man of too much elegance for that. But the meaning was perfectly clear. Kenji said yes. He agreed. He said, of course, of course. The dinner ended an hour later. Handshakes, business cards exchanged in the Japanese manner, with 2 hands, a small bow. Mr. Harada said it had been a pleasure. He said to Patrick that he had a very remarkable mother. Patrick said he was aware of that. In the parking lot, under the wide Arizona sky, Patrick walked with me to my car. He waited until we were away from the others, and then he stopped and looked at me. Mom, he said, how long? Almost 10 years, I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I didn't know. I told him I knew he didn't know. I told him it was all right. Did you understand what they were saying tonight? He asked. Before you spoke? I looked at him, my son, who I had raised alone, who I had driven to school in a car that needed new brake pads for 4 months before I could afford to fix them, who I had watched cross every stage and clear every bar I could not have imagined clearing myself. I thought about whether to tell him the full truth of what I had heard. I told him yes. I said that I had understood. He was quiet again, longer this time. Then he said, I'm sorry, Mom. I told him he had nothing to apologize for, that he had not said those things, that I did not want him in the middle of anything, and that I had not spoken tonight to cause trouble. I had spoken because there was a moment when the right thing was to let the truth take up its own space. That was all. He put his arm around me and we stood there for a minute in the parking lot. And I thought about all the years it had just been the two of us, and about how language, any language, is ultimately just the shape we give to what we already feel. He drove home that night, and I drove back to the hotel where I was staying, a pleasant place near the freeway with a little courtyard where I sat for a while before going to bed. I ordered a cup of tea from the lobby and I sat in the courtyard, and I thought about Mrs. Tanaka in Osaka, who had spent hundreds of hours with me on a video call, correcting my particle errors and laughing at my accent and telling me, each time we finished, that I was getting better. I thought about the Tuesday group at the library. A retired chemistry professor, a woman who had lived in Tokyo for a decade and come back speaking the language like breathing, 2 young men who were studying it for video games and ended up staying because they actually loved it. I thought about how I had started all of it simply because something in me needed to. I never imagined it would matter in this particular way. I had not learned Japanese as a strategy. I had learned it because language is a door, and I had always believed that the more doors you could open, the more of the world you could stand inside of. 2 weeks later, Patrick called. He said that Mr. Harada's team had moved forward with preliminary discussions. He said that Kenji had been, his word, noticeably different since the dinner. More respectful was the phrase Patrick used, carefully, the way he chooses his words when he is navigating something delicate. He also told me that Yuki had called him the morning after the dinner and said that her mother wanted to know if I would be willing to have lunch with her the next time I was in Arizona. Just the two of us. I told Patrick I would think about it. That was the honest answer. I was not ready to perform a reconciliation I did not quite feel yet, but I was willing to consider it, which was more than I could have said the night before the dinner. I know what some people will think. They will think the point of this story is that I outsmarted someone or that I won something. I understand why it looks that way from the outside, but sitting in that courtyard with my tea, that was not what I felt. What I felt was simpler than that. I felt like myself. I felt like the full version of myself, the one that does not shrink or disappear or become the widow or the simple woman from Columbus. I felt like a person who had spent a decade building something in the quiet, without applause, without anyone watching, and discovered that it had been worth building all along. I am 63 years old. I still meet with my conversation group when I am home, though it has moved from the library to a coffee shop on the north side. Mrs. Tanaka and I still talk twice a month. I have started looking at flights to Osaka for next spring. There is a word in Japanese, ikigai, that roughly means the reason you get up in the morning, the thing that gives your life its particular shape and purpose. People write whole books about finding it. I do not know if Japanese is my ikigai exactly, but I know that the Tuesday evenings at the library, the slow accumulation of vocabulary and grammar and understanding, the way a sentence in another language makes you see your own thoughts from a different angle. I know that all of that made me more of who I already was, and I know that being more fully yourself is the best possible thing you can bring to any table. Even one in Scottsdale, with heavy linen napkins and lighting so dim you have to squint at the menu. Especially that one,